Good, good evening, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight for another Aspiring Talks. My name is Noelle Zhang, and I'm one of the AITC coordinators. And to kick off our evening, I'm going to introduce Aspire, the AITC program, and our wonderful speaker. Aspire is a nonprofit organization working to build and empower a community of Asian American women and Asian American women leaders through identity development, mentorship, and education with their various programs and events. With my team, our Aspire in the Community program is working to provide a platform for Asian American women to share their stories and experiences, foster meaningful relationships, and unify the community. And with that, I'd like to lay down some ground rules for the workshop.
Please note that the talk will be recorded. For respect, mute your mic or we'll mute you. To focus on the speaker, you can change your Zoom settings to speaker view by clicking the three dots on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. Show your love with emojis if a shared thought resonates with you by clicking reactions at the bottom of the screen or popping something in the chat. Also, chat the team with any questions and change your name and add your pronouns by hovering over your picture. And for any additional support, email community@girlsaspire.org.
Tonight, we welcome Cat Coley. Cat Coley is a business strategist, podcast host, speaker, and published writer. She is known for her bold, with a dash of comedy, dynamic, with real life experience approach in an authentic way. She also utilizes her 20-plus years of experience in the corporate world spent in event management, sales, marketing, and business development. Her passion for storytelling led Kat to start her own podcast, How to Bounce Back Like a Badass, about the stories of her own fall from grace, major life moments, and business lessons. Her favorite part of being a business coach is her community. She's a big believer that everyone has a story to tell and loves helping her audience connect their stories with their business. But Kat's proudest accomplishment is raising her witty, smart, and kind little girl. When she's not working with clients, you can find Kat spending time with her daughter and partner at the beach, painting and snuggling with their two rescue kittens. Without further ado, please welcome Kat.
Hello, everybody. How are you? Nice to see you. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for the wonderful introduction. I'm excited to have this talk and why I feel so compelled to talk about storytelling. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. Perfect. Okay. I think we got it here. All right, awesome. Hopefully you guys could see this. So again, as Renee and Noelle introduced me, I am a business consultant and my focus is on business growth strategist. I'm also a podcast host, speaker, and a published writer. And the power of storytelling is just so compelling and important to me. And then I'm just sharing the 3 lessons. There are hundreds more, but 3 that I know are powerful and strong and that I utilize in when I speak and when I work with my clients. So we're going to skip the first part here. Again, on top of being a coach and a mama, I'm also a podcast host, and you'll soon kind of learn why it's called Bounce Back Like a Badass. Mama to my 10-year-old girl who's like 16, it's just 10 going on 16. As we girls all know, it's happening quick. And I'm also mama to 2 rescue kittens, so I'm literally a cat lady. And I currently live in Southern California with my daughter and my British partner, who we nicknamed James Bond, because his name is actually James. So makes perfect sense. Owning your real stories, embracing all of your imperfections, and not caring about what others think about you will literally catapult you to the person that you are meant to be. I strongly, strongly believe in this. And but this is probably one of the hardest lessons to learn. We're not in the lessons part yet, but this is just something that I know I strive to not focus on trying to be perfect, and my clients do too. And also not caring so much about what other people think about us, because I really think that that stunts our growth. So to give you a little bit of context of why storytelling is so compelling to me and why it's important and why it's the foundation of my business, I have to go back a little ways, basically decades, and so that you could understand why this is such an important thing for me. So let's see here. Oh, did I lose it? I'm hoping you could still see my screen. Could you still see my screen?
I can see it.
Oh, there it is. Okay, sorry. Okay, so back to my humble beginnings. I am Filipino, 100%, and I was born in the Philippines in 1976, many, many moons ago, in a mountainous city called Baguio City, which is mostly now known for universities and resorts. If you have the means to take a vacation, that's usually kind of the place where people take vacation in the Philippines. If you've been to that side of the world, then you probably know that it is hot and muggy. And so where I grew up was kind of a great place to escape. So when I was about 5 years old, my family, which consisted of my mom, my older brother, and my sister, we moved to a little bit further down south to Olongapo City to be closer to my other family members. My dad was not around, unfortunately, and so we needed some help from our family. And we ended up moving in with my aunt and uncle, who had just at that time moved from the United States back to the Philippines. So living life in the Philippines by modern standards was not lavish, but by Philippine standards was we kind of had it made. I refer to it to like if you guys are familiar, I know I'm really aging myself here, but the Prince of Bel-Air. So, I mean, that was literally what it was. Like the Prince of Bel-Air, living with my aunt and uncle. We lived in an 8-bedroom home, a 2-story house, private gate, live-in housekeepers, cooks, personal driver. We went to a private school. We were large. We were living large here. And again, such a far cry from my life in the mountainous city of Baguio when we moved in with my aunt and uncle. But here's kind of a little bit of twist to this. So when I was about 8 years old, to have a chance at a better life, my family decided that it was a better idea to take my brother, my sister, and I and have us move to the United States with my aunt and uncle. And I am utterly grateful for that decision, because otherwise I would not be here in front of you today. That being said, it was a shock to all of us. And so to legally do this, my aunt and uncle became my mom and dad, and they had to adopt us. And unfortunately and sadly, we did not move with my real mom, who later moved to the US when she got remarried. Now, this is where my life story became really convoluted, and where I was definitely feeling like, okay, there's a huge change, there's a huge shift. How do we move forward from here? There's just a picture of, we moved to Reno, Nevada. I don't know if anyone knows where that's at. It's like the biggest little city in the world. Emily, I saw you were originally from San Francisco. That's literally like 4 hours away. San Francisco is a place that we used to go visit all the time when I lived in Reno. But it was a culture shock, to say the least. The bottom picture is, I think, right before we left the Philippines. That is my aunt and uncle, who is now my mom and dad, or who is not now, but okay, life in these United States. So to say that life in the US took some adjusting is an understatement. Not only did we not move with my mom, we had new parents, and on top of that, we really left behind a close-knit family. And starting a new life in a very unfamiliar place was difficult. And when I first started school here in the US, I needed to be enrolled in a thing called ESL. And for those of you who might not understand what that is, it's English as a second language. And so not only did I stand out because I was just a few of the Asians that were in my school, but I didn't speak English fluently either. So I spoke with a very thick accent, Filipino accent, and I was made fun of. And so this for me was the first time I recall, getting not necessarily bullied, but made fun of for being different. And this experience became really something that left like a mark inside me about why it was important for me to blend in, and why it was important for me to not to be different and not to stand out from the crowd. And so this was a deep subconscious change and shift in me that I didn't realize happened at such a young age. This is me and my sister, and my brother and my older sister. So as it went on, really quickly, I'm just going to show up in the chat to see if anyone has any questions. Oh, yay, UNR. Awesome. Yes. Lots of family went to UNR. Lots of my family. And actually, there's a couple that are still going to UNR. So a game of pretend. So my parents really discouraged my siblings and I from speaking our native tongue, which is Tagalog, even inside our house. Again, it's just to avoid the scrutiny of being singled out, and also so that we could get used to speaking English. But by doing that, it also made me forget how to speak Tagalog because I'd really no one to speak it to. So in time, I lost my accent and my English got better. But again, sadly, I could no longer speak Tagalog. And it took a few years, but it didn't really take long for me to lose the accent. I played the part of blending in really well, as you could see here. I did all the things that normal kids would do and growing up, and I blended in really well, but I really avoided conversations about my family, especially the fact that I was adopted. And very rare did I have friends over, because again, kind of being different, funky smells in the house for those of us who know Asian food. There's always something, my mom cooking something weird in the kitchen. And again, I just didn't want to be different. I didn't want to be singled out. And I really wasn't sure of who I was. So, it was just easier to just not have anybody around and not share my story. Okay, lesson number 1. There's only one of you all the time. Be fearlessly yourself. This is harder to do than it is to say, obviously. This is a lesson that I wish I'd learned much earlier. When you're young, again, you just want to fit in. You don't want to look differently. You don't want to think differently. You kind of want to go with wherever your peers are doing and going. And you just don't want to be judged for fear of being different. So, but as you get older, you just realize that you fight harder to be different, to look, talk, think, act different than anybody else. You just try to find the unique sense of you, and you want to embrace that. And more importantly, as you get older, you want to embrace where you've come from. Unfortunately for me, this was a hard lesson. I moved straight out of high school to Las Vegas, Nevada. So not too far from Reno, but a huge city in comparison. My older sister was in Las Vegas already, and so I just basically followed in her footsteps. I started to work various jobs while going to school, and I was really trying to find out who I was at this time. Unfortunately, life had other plans for me. I found myself working for one of the biggest and most desirable resorts in Las Vegas, and I ended up finding work that I really liked and working my way up from an hourly employee to management and salaried employee fairly quickly, because the place had just opened. So they were really looking for some leaders, and I was gung-ho to be, a young leader. So I didn't realize that this position would become my career. That being said, when I moved to Las Vegas, it also exposed me to a very diverse community of Filipinos my age. So going to school, I was predominantly, my friends were mostly white, and I will say mostly white, and there may have been another ethnicity there, but certainly not Filipino. And I could probably count in one hand how many Asians there were in my school and in my classes, and specifically even Filipino. But then I moved to Las Vegas, and it was a reverse culture shock because my small group of friends mostly were Filipino. I think maybe one or two American. I wholeheartedly embraced the Filipino culture, our food, our traditions, and I also began to relearn to speak Tagalog again. However, this time I had an English accent, which was quite funny. And my friends made fun of it. So I'd come full circle. I had friends who made fun of me because I had a Filipino accent. Now I had friends making fun of me because I had an English accent. So I immersed myself in the Filipino community so much so that I started a long-term relationship and then later married and then divorced a Filipino man. And today I can speak Tagalog fluently with my Filipino accent, and I'm able to go back and forth, which is something I'm quite proud of. And I'm teaching my daughter how to speak Tagalog as well. So I'm quite proud of that. And although there are some remarkable things that happened, this is one of my prouder moments of being able to immerse myself back into my community and really embrace who I am and where I came from. Oops, my bad. So being unapologetically you. So my job, as I worked my way up the corporate ladder, my job required that I work with CEOs and executives of Fortune 500 companies, celebrities, high profile athletes. So I was worked with a lot of in the public eye companies and people. So I was often mistaken for someone's assistant. Not only was I actually young in age, but I looked young too, because Asians don't raisins, Asian don't raisin. And so I was overlooked a lot. So literally I would walk into meetings and people, it seemed like they wouldn't even see me. And they would be like, who's your boss? And I'm like, I'm the boss. And they're like, no, who's your boss? I'm like, no, I am the boss. And so I had to work really hard to be seen and heard amongst my staff and amongst our clients. Some of my staff were 2-3 times my age. So there was a shift there. And also that I had to be respected as well as a woman of color and as a woman in general. And then of course my age came to play a lot. So, and also in the industry that I worked predominantly with white male counterparts who had no problems asserting their dominance. And because I had yet to learn how to stand my ground, own my story, I was still apologizing for everything. And I was still preferring to be in the background, or didn't know how to stand out from the crowd, because I taught myself many, many moons ago that it was a bad thing to stand out from the crowd. I didn't assert my assertiveness, and their behaviors continued, unfortunately. So here's a lesson number 2. Owning who you are allows you to be honest with yourself. You understand now the reason why this is so important. And this is a key thing that I help my clients with a lot, is when they walk into our coaching sessions, especially in the very beginning, a lot of my clients feel like they need to tell me what I think I want to hear, but really I just want to hear the honest and open and vulnerable part of what they're doing in their business and in their lives. And so that I can really help make massive change and transformation in their business. But unfortunately, sometimes when we don't own our stories, our failures, our ups, our downs, and sideways. And that just means we're not being honest with ourselves. So this is a lesson that I've had to learn the very hard way, as you can see, you'll see here in a minute. And then also what my clients learn through their trials and tribulations as well. So the next part of my journey is where, like I said, this lesson comes into real play, because it's really, it became really imperative that I share and the people around me share all of their stories, the good, the bad, and especially the ones that we bury. My fall from grace. So while I was climbing the corporate ladder, I also was hiding a very, very big secret, and I had made some really terrible mistakes. One that unfortunately would eventually catch up with me, and it changed the trajectory of my life forever. Like this one single, and then from there, more choices that came from that one single choice literally affected. It's like the butterfly effect. It affected everything thereafter. I didn't realize it, but it did. Everything we do has consequences, good or bad. So as I said, one horrible choice led to another and another, and I found myself under a mountain of lies that I could no longer hide from. So I share this in everything that I do now, obviously not then. I share this with my clients. I openly share this with my clients before we even start working together, just so they know where I'm coming from. So I don't share this for the shock and awe, just to show the real, honest, and raw choices that we make, good and bad. So the secret that I was hiding, if you're reading a little further along, is that I was taking money from my place of work and pretending to be somebody I was not. And one day, as it usually happens, it all came crashing down. And it was a situation that I was not involved in, but I got pulled into it. And again, I won't go into the very, very long and convoluted story. I do go into it on my podcast, where I share all the bits and pieces of what happened. And but that is kind of how this happened. But it took a long time to get here. I was there for many, many years, and I made this unbelievably foolish mistake very early on in my career. So anything done in the dark comes out in the light. To simplify what happened, and to simplify the chain of events, because this was found out, and obviously that was quite a big deal, I was suspended pending an investigation. I was let go, rightfully so. I was advised to hire a lawyer because they intended to sue me. I ended up leaving Las Vegas to start a new life in Southern California. I didn't know at the time, but I was running away. I had this thing where I would just like, okay, I'm going to go, I'm going to start a new life. And then that's going to be what I'm going to do and focus on. My fiance had no idea that I'd done anything. Again, keeping secrets kind of became my special power. And I started a new career in Southern California. Once again, nobody knew. Still hiding, still pretending, and did not learn the first lesson or the second lesson. Those are lessons I had to learn a different way. I was scared and embarrassed and ashamed and guilt-ridden, as you can imagine. But I started to move on with my life. 2 years had gone by. I got married and I started a family. When my daughter was about 6 months old, I was made aware that the 2-year-long investigation was coming to an end, and I needed to get my lawyer and come back to Las Vegas to do the final findings of their investigation. My lawyer, who I trusted because I don't know the criminal system, basically told me that you've got to plead guilty to avoid a lengthy trial. You don't want that. And because it was a white collar crime, I will likely get 99.99% likely get probation. So I went back and forth for about 5 months, So I was holding down an executive level job here in Southern California. I was newly married. I was a new mom, and all of that was in the background. So I was carrying a lot and hiding still a lot. So then came my sentencing day. I drove to Las Vegas by myself, parked in valet parking. That was confident. I was that confident that I was going to be leaving the courthouse. And as you can imagine, by me saying that I parked in valet, I did not leave that day. I did not leave for 19 months. I was sentenced to 19 months in prison. And that day, so I left the courtroom, I was sentenced, and I went straight to jail. I had never been in jail my entire life, didn't know anyone who had been in jail. So all of this was, as you can imagine, very new, very raw. And here I was again, new mom, new wife, have a new life in Southern California. And there I am in prison. So lesson 3, sharing your story gives others permission to share their truth as well. I wasn't yet at a point where I needed to share my story. The time that I spent, the 19 months, as you can imagine, if you are given this sentence, it felt like 19 years. There was a moment when I was in court where I was left all alone, and I thought maybe I could escape. These are the things that are playing in my head right after I was sentenced, going, I could not believe where I was at. And I kept thinking, maybe they forgot about me. Maybe they're just waiting. Maybe it's a trick. It wasn't. Unfortunately, they came and got me, and I was moved through the process. But I never thought that I would be here this day, ever, sharing my story with anyone other than my close-knit friends who knew, or my family. So that, like I said, the time I was in prison was very much all-encompassing. I missed out on my daughter's first years. So she was barely 1 year old, and wasn't talking, wasn't walking. And I also, my marriage fell apart in that time. But I had a choice to become either a victim and stay bitter, or I could do the opposite. And I could really try to find a way to better myself. And more importantly, to understand who I was. This is not an easy choice. Prison is not for the faint of heart. And again, I talk about what happened, really, the real story. So when this all happened, I'm not sure if you guys remember the show Orange is the New Black, which I will say to this day, I cannot watch. Those are things I can't fathom, or even I can't even think about watching. But that was like the show that was popular when this all happened to me. So, everyone who wrote in was like, is it like this? I'm like, no, it is nothing like you see on television, like you hear about, or you see in the movies. No. That being said, that being inside there was not a place to be rehabilitated. So I had to find ways to work on myself. So there was a lot of mental health issues that I didn't even realize I had. But the biggest thing was that this was a place I no longer had to pretend to be somebody I was not. Because the people there were there for a reason. So no one could really judge me. People on the outside, they judge me, of course. And that's their prerogative. But the people inside, there was no judgment of anybody else. We were all in the same place. As I said here, to me, prison was the greatest equalizer. So after 19 months, literally 19 months to the day, I came home, and I did not recognize the life that I left. It felt like the whole world stopped, or at least my world stopped, but the whole world kept on going because they had to. Everyone had to go to work, vacations, family, kids grew up, my daughter grew up, but I had no money, I had no job, I had no husband. My husband, unfortunately, asked for divorce the day after I came home. So I thought that I hit rock bottom, but I did not realize that until I came home and found myself even lonelier and more alone than when I was away. I was fortunate that I had a connection that helped me get my feet on the ground so I could come back to Southern California and be with my daughter. So I'm grateful for that connection. That being said, it plagued me really badly that I had gone through something so difficult and so traumatizing, but I was kind of being asked to not share this. And mainly I was being asked by my family because there's a lot of shame around what happened to me. And honestly, a lot of my family members till this day do not know that I was gone, that I was away. They just said, oh, she's just on vacation for 19 months. So my family were very insistent that I just get a job, go back into what I was doing if I could, because now I had a record, and move on with my life and forget it ever happened. I love this quote, difficult roads lead to beautiful destinations. I absolutely love that. And I feel 100% that quote. So again, I really realized that after I came home and I was starting conversations with others about what I was doing or where I had been, because then I had to start lying again. I was like, I'm done with that part of my life. So after finding the courage, I started to share my story. And then from there, it became really, really clear to me that I was not going to go back in the corporate world. That was not going to be my future anymore. I learned this after having spoke at a workshop, and I was pulled off stage, not pulled off stage, but when I came off the stage, I had 2 or 3 other people that came in the backstage and told me about their story. And it was not something that I was anticipating, because the talk I had was actually for social media and influencers and sharing stories. And that's basically what it was. But I shared this story because like I said, I decided at this point, this is what I wanted to share this part of me. And it gave them permission to share their very, very deep rooted stories with me. And this is when I started to connect the dots and really realize that a lot of our stories become the survival guide for others going through something similar. Now, the 3 that pulled me aside in the back, they hadn't gone through the prison system, anything like that, but trauma is trauma. Those emotions are similar and the same, the things that we feel. And fear is fear, and hurt is hurt, anger is anger. So they felt that when I spoke, and it was so powerful for me to realize that, yes, like, although it's embarrassing and I regret, obviously I'm not gratifying what I did. I made terrible mistakes, but the fact that I can speak about it and I could share the things that I learned while I was in there, and then when I came home and how I got through it, that was empowering for me. So once I started to make the decision to share my story with my small community of friends, it became easier and easier to share. I was invited to go to on podcasts and then workshops. And as I received more requests for podcasts and facilitating more workshops, it really opened the door to start my coaching business. First, I started as a life coach, but then I had 20 plus years in sales and marketing and business strategy and business development. So I focused my business on business as a business strategist, focused on storytelling and growth mindset strategies. Today, my clients come from all walks of life. And again, I am very upfront about my story. Most of them find me through that story. And so I don't have to really go into a lot of details about what happened, but some don't. And so I'm upfront about it. I don't shy away from it. I'm proud of my scars. So and what this really does is it gives my clients permission to show up with their scars and mistakes as well. I absolutely love what I do. And I know I went through the hardships, the embarrassment, the regrets, the guilt, for a reason. So I'm trying to find more ways now to, share my story from the rooftop, again, to the dismay of my parents, who till this day probably have never listened to my podcast. Because my fall from grace was so public facing, there were, I want to say, news articles, blogs that talked about me, because I worked for a very, very well-known company. And so I was made an example of. And so it was very public facing, but there was also a lot of stories floating around about me. So I wanted to share my story, and I wanted to come from me. And the best way I knew how to do that was to share it myself. And so in 2019, after a lot of hesitation and overthinking, and again, to the dismay of my parents, who just wished I would just move on from this and keep it under the rug and keep it quiet, I ended up launching Bounce Back Like a Badass. Hopefully now that makes sense why I called my podcast that way. So when I was sharing my story, every time I would share my story, I would get the audience would come and say, "You're such a badass." I'm like, "No, I'm not a badass." And then there was one in particular where someone had said, the bounce back is so badass, and I was like, I think I may use that for something. And so I wrote it down, and thus this is where Bounce Back Like a Badass. And I talk in depth and in detail about all the things that happened, why it led up to what it did, the details of the complexities of my case, my trial, the people involved, and what happened while I was gone and when I came home, and thus when I started my business. And so I've since then, I've mentioned, I've been on dozens of interviews, on podcasts, and my story's been published in a book. And then my book is also in the works. This next season of my podcast concentrates on other people sharing their stories of triumph. So I'm super excited about that as well. So there is a big shift. Just to say that this was a long road to go from corporate, and then I worked in e-commerce when I was here first before I left in Southern California for a few years for a startup. And there's a big shift from corporate to being an entrepreneur, and it is big. The mental shift to go from the corporate world is, again, not for the faint of heart, but absolutely worth it, in my opinion. In the corporate world, you feel a sense of security knowing that a paycheck is arriving every 2 weeks or so, as long as you do what you're asked. And but I think, as we recently learned with the mass layoff and mass exodus during the pandemic, a steady paycheck is not always guaranteed. So that said, if you are a person that loves stability and knowing where your paycheck is coming from, then corporate may be the road for you. However, if you are somebody that feels passionate about sharing what you know and being of service to others, and you can handle the emotional and mental roller coaster of entrepreneurship, and not to mention the financial up and downs as well, then maybe entrepreneurship is going to be your cup of tea. Being your own boss is a lot harder than it seems. And for those of you who are out there who are your own bosses, you know exactly what I mean. It unfortunately is not what the hashtag boss babe, boss girl, boss lady, what that depicts on social media. There's a lot involved. These are just some. I mean, I could probably list 100, but these are the main characteristics that I think you have to have before you even try to venture down this road. You have to have a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. And if you don't know what that is or what the difference is, there's Dr. Carol Dweck wrote the book about growth mindset, just knowing that you are capable of learning new things, that you are not born to know things, not born to know all the things. You have to learn quickly from your mistakes. You have to be okay with being rejected a lot. a lot. I cannot emphasize that more, but a lot. You will hear no more often than you will hear than you'll hear yes. But when the yeses come, it's worth it. Know that done is better than perfect. I am a recovering perfectionist. I'm a recovering people pleaser. Again, from my past, you'll kind of understand where the people pleasing came from. So this was a hard lesson for me because I want every I dotted, every T crossed, and that's just not always going to be the case, especially when you're just starting out. You need to know how to be accountable for yourself and for your time. This is one of the hardest lessons, again, when you go from corporate, when somebody is literally asking you, waiting for you, checking in on you all day, every day, hopefully not micromanaging you, but somebody's there to, that you're accountable to. When you are an entrepreneur, you're accountable to yourself. So if you take a day off today and you take off a day off tomorrow, then that means that maybe you will not get a paycheck at the end of the week, and maybe it'll be next month. So that is one of the hardest lessons, again, when you are accountable for yourself. Also, when you are your own boss, you have to know and understand your limitations and understand what you're capable of doing, and be okay with knowing that you cannot do it all. And then you need to leverage your strengths and leverage your weaknesses as well. And I learned that the hard way by not knowing how to delegate sooner and asking for help sooner. The other part is that your why has to be bigger than just money. So it's nice to have money. It's nice to do the fancy things and live the, the lifestyle, but your why has to be bigger than that, because I think you will fall flat, and your, the value that you provide others will not be, what you think that it is. And I think that when you're motivated only by money, and as somebody who knows that clearly, it does not work out well. You have to really believe in yourself. I know this is so cliche and so simple, but that is one of the things. It's so hard for people to believe in their what they're capable of, and that just because 10,000, a million other people are doing it does not mean that you can't do it too, and do it better. You have to have a deep knowing that people's opinions are based on their limitations and have nothing to do with you. That one's hard, especially family members and Asian family members. Be able to take constructive criticism. Some people are not good at that. I'm not one of those. Know that you're going to be judged regardless of what you do and say. So you may as well do and say what it is that works for you. And you will wear many hats. You are CEO, CFO, founder, accountant, social media manager, customer support, sales, marketing, branding. You're it. So you have to know how to manage your time and be able to understand what's going to move your business forward and what's going to stunt your growth. I do, of course, want to touch about the Asian stigma of working in the corporate world for 20 plus years. So as a woman of color in many industries I worked in, I had to work really hard to be recognized and not be ignored. Like I said, when I would walk into these meetings, half the time they assumed my assistant, who was much older than I was the boss. And so I would play it off, but it hurt. And so again, I felt like I needed to prove myself even more, that I knew what I was doing and I deserved to be in that position. So again, most of the colleagues I worked with were American. I was lucky in the fact that the employer that I worked for the longest really strived for diversity and inclusion, but it's not to say that I didn't experience discrimination. However, I will say that most of the discrimination I did encounter came from the men who were our corporate clients, who felt that it was okay to comment about my nationality, my features, ask me out on dates, even if I said I was married, and that I had to work even harder to be heard and then taken seriously, it was so hard to do because my job was already very complex and very stressful, and then to have to deal with that as well. Now, As an entrepreneur working with exclusively women, I make it my mission that we are seen and we are heard, we make waves, and that we are an asset as opposed to a liability. I strongly believe that we just need women all over the world to rise up. So I share my story to give others permission to own their stories, to show up, as I mentioned, when I work with my clients, to show up real, unapologetic, and in their truest form, but really and truly deep down, and I express it often, I share my story for my daughter. I want her to know that we are all imperfect, each one capable of making gigantic mistakes that have big consequences. But despite that our past failures do not determine our future. I want her to embrace who she is. I want her to embrace her uniqueness. I want her to stand out from the crowd. And I want her, again, to be proud of being half Filipino. And she is, and I'm proud of that. And I want her to make waves, and I want her to take up space, because her story matters and she matters as well. So today I know now I share, as I mentioned, my story often. I share it with all my clients. I share it on social media, of course, on my podcast, and really anyone that would listen, which is a far cry for when I came home many years ago, where I really wanted to kind of blend into the background once again and not be heard and just disappear. I'm proud of my heritage. I'm proud of my Filipino background. I'm proud of my scars. I am proud of my mistakes. I'm proud that it makes me who I am. And I'm proud that I have shared my story, the good, the bad, and especially the stuff that I wanted to bury. So thank you so much for staying on and listening. And hopefully we have some questions if you have any. I'd love to answer any questions that you may have. I'm going to stop sharing here.
All right. Thank you so much, Kat, for sharing your life story in such a wonderful presentation on how you transition from the corporate to the entrepreneurial world and all the successes and obstacles that you encountered. So we're going to move on to the Q&A portion. So it looks like we have a couple of minutes left, so we might just pull a few questions. So before we dive into the main portion of the Q&A, we're going to start off with a rapid fire round. So Noelle will lead that. And these are just really fun, laid back questions, and just answer whatever comes to your mind would be a good answer as well.
Sure.
Okay, so starting off, what did you eat for breakfast today?
I had coffee. That's usually my breakfast.
I feel that.
Breakfast of champions.
Yeah. And who was the last person that you hugged?
My boyfriend.
Oh, that's sweet. And what's the best thing that has happened to you this month?
This month.
Or I guess maybe June, since we just started the month.
In June, my boyfriend's in the background. He's like, Kiana. My daughter, oh yeah, you know what? My daughter made, my daughter always, it's just kind of the center of everything, but it didn't happen to me, it happened to her, which then has happened to me because I'm her mom, right? I take all the accolades. But she made her kind of this A-team soccer team. And she had to try out. And so she's only in her second year. She's competing against kids that have been playing soccer for 4 or 5 years. And this is her second year, and she made the team and she's super excited. So they only took 13 girls out of 40, and she was one of them. So I'm excited for her because those are things I could not do when I was her age. Again, blending in, right?
Oh, that's amazing. Congrats to her.
Yeah.
And for the last rapid fire question, what is your top bucket list item for vacation destinations?
Oh, goodness. I would say maybe Fiji.
Yeah, good choice. And
it's funny. I live somewhere warm, but my destinations I always choose are always still the beachy, warm. Like maybe one day someone will ask and I say Alaska, but I don't think so. I don't like being cold.
yeah, honestly. And I'll hand it off to Renee to start the Q&A portion.
Awesome.
All right, so I have two questions on my end. The first question is, how do you think the field you're in right now has shaped your career and identity?
Well, gosh, I think that one, being a woman of color, and being an entrepreneur and speaking kind of in this coaching industry, it's changed because I feel empowered to empower other people to make the right choices for them. For the longest time, especially when I was in the corporate world, I didn't know what I wanted, and so I was always following somebody else, and I was always following somebody else's suggestion. And even though, as much as I worked my way up the corporate ladder, I didn't want some of those job positions, but it was suggested by my boss and my boss's boss that it was good. It was good for my resume. It was a good career building. And so I did, and I took it. And most often I would get the position, although I didn't want it. Now being in this position, I really, really encourage the people that I work with, my clients, to really go after the things that they want. And so the identity shift of being a leader as opposed to a follower is huge. And the identity of owning who you are and being accountable to yourself is even bigger.
Yeah, great answer. And then my last question before I hand it back to Noelle is, do you think your podcast has better amplified your voice and as a storyteller, and especially as a woman of color, and how you kind of portray your message to your listeners?
Yes, absolutely. I'll be honest, I thought about for the longest time before I started my podcast for probably a good year. And I sat on it for long, and I started to look to see, like, what are other Asian, women out there doing. I didn't really see a lot of people kind of starting, the ones, women of color, Asian women starting podcasts. And if I did, they had like already reached, thousands and thousands of subscribers. So I was like, oh, I'm gonna be starting at zero, basically. But after a while of figuring out, okay, I'm not the best writer, and it takes me a really long time to get my thoughts onto paper. And eventually that book is going to get written. But this was the fastest way for me to really get my story out there. And so I think I shared this with you a long time ago, Renee, that the very first podcast episode that I ever did was in a closet on my phone. And it happened on one day. If you guys know who Gary Vee is, I was listening to Gary Vee, and somebody in the audience asked him, how do I start a podcast? And Gary Vee, being his style, he's very annoyed style and very matter of fact, he literally pulled out his phone. He downloaded an app called Anchor, or actually it probably already was on his phone. And he said, press record. And he said, I'm starting a podcast. He's like, there you go, start. And I was like, oh, how easy was that? And so I literally downloaded Anchor that day. I recorded my first episode, which was like 10, it wasn't that long. It was just introducing my episode, and I hit record. And also, my podcast is not edited. I know some people are like, how dare you? Because I feel if I edit it, that it's not me. It doesn't come across as me. And I tried editing my first few episodes, and I got so deep into the editing part that I was like, this, I know, Karen, it's not edited. I know. And the best review or that I ever got was someone said, I felt like I was sitting in a cafe talking to you. And I was like, yes, that is the intention of my podcast. And so, yes, I do edit interviews, of course, but when it's just me, it is unedited. I go and I try not to say there's two words that I say a lot. It's and I know. And I know I said that I know during this this workshop a lot, but I just feel if I'm going to ask you to show up authentic, if I'm going to ask you to show up as the real you, then I probably need to as well. And so that's the reason why I don't edit my podcast. So you'll hear a lot of, there's a lot of curse word in there because that's how I speak. I speak like a sailor when I get really into it, and I talk with my hands. As you guys notice, I talk with my hands. I don't know, I'm not part Italian, but I talk with my hands a lot. So, but I'm sorry, Renee, to answer your question of how it changed, I think it really did, because I think showing up as a woman of color, as an Asian woman, and putting myself out there, sharing my story, talking about my background, telling people I was adopted, telling them I went to prison, telling them I failed, telling them that I made gigantic mistakes. I think it just really opens up the door for people to say, okay, like if she can say that, then maybe I can share mine. So it really has shifted. A lot of the audience that I have are Asian Americans, and for sure my daughter, who has yet to know all of the interest in the details of that time, but she knows I run a podcast. She knows it's Bounce Back Like a Badass, and she knows, and she shows it to her friends, which it makes me feel proud. She'll turn on the television and her friends will come over and she'll be like, look, that's my mom. Like she'll show it on Spotify or Apple or on iHeartRadio. And I was like, yeah, that's actually kind of cool. And so, for her and for others, I think, yeah, it does open up the doors.
Yeah, that's awesome. And just to wrap up this Q&A session, our last question for today, since you're still making your way in your career path, where do you envision yourself in the next couple years?
In the next couple of years, I hope to have most of my programs and services automated. I love, love, love the aspect of one-on-one coaching so much, but there is only one of me to go around. If you are an entrepreneur out there, you know that time is everything. And so to leverage my time, I am turning a few of the programs I have into online courses, whether it's do it yourself or group coaching. So I will be shifting my coaching from less one-on-one to more group, more online, and then that's more speaking engagements and podcasts as well.
Yeah, great. So, in conclusion, thank you again to Kat for taking the time to join us for an aspiring talk. And tonight she led us through her career as a podcaster, entrepreneur, and how she navigates herself in life. I hope you all gained insightful advice. And with that, we'd like to thank everyone for joining us tonight.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Noelle, I think you're on mute.
Oh, sorry, my bad. Yeah, so we will be sending out the slide deck, and we encourage everyone to follow Kat as well as Aspire on our various social media platforms, which will be included in the chat and is on the screen here. And at this point, we'd like to invite anyone who has any other questions for an additional 15 minutes Q&A. Otherwise, have a lovely evening, and we hope to see you at our next event.